part of being human. We've been talking about toddlerhood and the baby period, and I'm going to go on into preschool, but I'm going to wait for a little while because there are a couple of issues I want to discuss first, and one of them is autism and inoculations. And I hear a lot of parents say they don't want to have their children inoculated with the various diseases because of the fact that it'll cause autism. But I want to go into some of the research, and I want to tell you what I think is going on, because it is clearly evident from the research that I've read and my talking to friends of mine who just happen to be neuropsychologists and study this kind of thing, that there's really no connection between inoculations and autism. But I know that a lot of people feel that way, and I can understand why they do. But the real reason that they do, I think, is that they get the inoculations and then they show the symptoms of autism. They happen at about the same time, but that does not mean that one causes the other. So let me get into this a little bit, because I want to put some people's minds at ease, because I know people worry about this. Now, autism is a spectrum disorder, and what that means is that you can have degrees of it. There are some people that have autism to such a degree that they're non-functional. I saw a beautiful little girl the other day. She was probably about 11 or 12. She's never left alone. They take her for walks. They hold her hand. They never let her be alone, and she's just gorgeous. Physically, she's developed like a 12-year-old girl. Mentally, she has very serious autism, and she can't do anything by herself. She can't take care of herself, and someone has to be with her all the time. And that's a very serious type of autism in which she has no functioning. As a human being, she'll never grow to the point where she can take care of herself. There are other people who have autism, and they go to college and they establish careers. Now, they're apt to have difficulties in personal relationships, because people with autism do. But the fact is, they can take care of themselves, they can go to college, they can get a job. And then you have Asperger's syndrome, which is really on the autism spectrum. Asperger's syndrome, people can function fairly normally, quite normally, but they lack some social skills. They have some difficulties. Their thinking sometimes is not right. But at the same time, they can have a normal life. For the most part, I met a guy who plays saxophone. I play saxophone myself. And we had wonderful conversations about music, and he has Asperger's. And as a matter of fact, if he hadn't told me that he had Asperger's, I probably wouldn't have picked up on it, except if I was with him in social situations or I saw him do something a little odd that I wondered about, that would kind of tip me off. But he didn't, and I might not have picked up on it. So remember, it is a spectrum disorder. And I also want to emphasize the fact that there's no single cause. I'm going to tell you what I think is going on that causes autism symptoms to show up at about the same time that children are getting their shots. But that's my opinion, and I think I do have a scientific background for it, but I'm not trying to tell you that what I'm going to tell you is the only cause of autism, because I think there can be many causes of autism, and I think we've only scratched the surface in terms of research as to what it is. So let me go ahead and talk about the vaccines that children have. In 1962, there were 5 vaccines given to children up to the age of, say, 15, just 5. In 1983, there were 24 vaccines given to children up to the age of 15. That's 1983. In the year 2016, which we just passed, I mean, this is 2017, there are 72 doses of vaccines given to children up to age 15, and 39 of these 72 doses are given before kindergarten age. Now, that seems to be an incredible amount of shots for any child to have. But this is what I've read. There are that many shots. Now, are they all necessary? I don't know. A doctor would tell you probably. I mean, you can give little girls shots so they won't get breast cancer when they're 16. I mean, there's just tons and tons of shots. It seems like an awful lot to me, but I don't have young children, and I don't know enough about what they protect against because they may all be necessary, but I'm not 100% convinced of that. Now, when babies are born, they don't necessarily show symptoms of autism. Now, what I'm saying is a general thing. There are some that do show some symptoms really early on, but there are many children with autism that as they're progressing through their infancy, they're perfectly normal. They act perfectly normal. Then, when they get to be about 15 months, 18 months, around the toddlerhood period, they start to develop autistic symptoms. What do? They may run around in circles. They may withdraw. They may not be able to talk. I mean, there are various symptoms that you would notice. It would be obvious to a parent that something was wrong. And so, therefore, it's about the toddler period when these symptoms show up. But that's also the age when they're getting a lot of their inoculations. So it would be very natural that a parent would think, I allowed my child to have all these shots and now he's autistic, so I wished I hadn't done it. These shots cause autism. I can understand the sequence of what a parent would think. And if I hadn't checked into it, I might think that myself. But there are a lot of children who don't have autism. It's increasing, but most children don't have it. So what happens? The brain goes through a growth spurt at about the same time as the child is a toddler. And so therefore you have a lot of cells, brain cells growing. The body is developing. The body goes through a growth spurt around the time of toddlerhood. That includes the brain, and the brain starts developing a lot of extra cells. Well, that's all right. That's normal development, except for the fact that some children grow too many cells. They grow too many cells, and they don't wire in right with the brain because there are too many of them to wire in right. And that's when you start to notice the autistic symptoms. The head is growing, the body is growing, the extra cells are there, and they're supposed to integrate into the nervous system, and some of them do, but if there are too many cells, and not all children do this, but for the children that have too many cells, they can't all integrate into the system. So what happens, they get these extra brain cells and they can't attach appropriately to the nervous system. And that's when you start getting the symptoms of autism. Now, if the child is not autistic, then of course they're not going to run into any kind of a problem. They take their shots, they do their normal developmental processes, and you don't notice anything different. They're just growing like they should be. But if they're autistic, they're growing too many cells. Not all children grow too many cells, just the ones that are autistic. And I think that if they weren't taking shots, they'd be autistic anyway because the brain would still be growing too many cells. But since it occurs at the same time as they're getting their shots, then it looks like the shots cause it, but not really so. It's like two things that are happening at the same time. The brain is growing inappropriately, too many cells, and you're getting your shots. So it looks like one is causing the other, but it really isn't. They're two separate issues. So when the brain grows too many cells, they grow to the point where the head sometimes is larger than it normally would be, and also heavier than it normally would be. And that can be anywhere from a few ounces, and I've read up to 6 pounds heavier, but that seems really odd to me. But a pound or two wouldn't be that unusual if you have too many cells. You know, how much does a cell weigh? It doesn't weigh much, but if you've got a lot of cells, then of course it adds up. So this baby has grown a lot of cells. They do not wire in properly because there are too many. The head is larger than it normally would be, anywhere from a few ounces to a pound or so. And then it's larger and it's heavier. Now, I had a friend of mine come to see me, and she brought her son with her. And he was just sitting in her lap. He wasn't talking, but he was behaving very appropriately, just sitting in her lap. and I noticed he had an abnormally large head. I didn't say anything to her about it. She was a friend of mine. I'd never seen her son, but she brought him out as we were visiting, and I noticed his head was really, really large. I took note of it, and not so large that you would think he was hydrocephalic. Hydrocephalic babies, those heads are absolutely huge, sometimes 40 inches around. He wasn't anything like that, but he was noticeably larger than I would expect for a baby to be of his age. Later on, she told me he was autistic and he can't talk. And she's got him in a special school to help him to learn to grow and try to take care of himself, but he's not talking because he's autistic. And so his head is large, and it could be that he has way too many brain cells and that he can't wire in like he should. And as a result of that, he has the autistic symptoms. And that's what I think is going on. The extra brain cells cannot connect to the brain right. And what happens is a child that can't talk, and he draws away, and he doesn't communicate, and he runs around in circles. You'll notice some of these children do that, and he's isolated in his own world. It's like he can't break out of his own world. Now, there are techniques where some children seem to have been healed. I know of one case, and I just saw this on television. I don't know him personally, but the child was autistic, and what they did, in order to get him to get into their world, they repeated everything he did. They built a special room on their house, and somebody was with him all the time. If he moved his arm like that, they did the same thing. They replicated all of his movements because they thought that would get his attention. Eventually, he was able to come into their world and understand them because they were doing what he was doing, and a connection between them was made. And after that, he was all right. He grew up to be a normal person. And there's a whole movie about him. It is a true case. And there was another case where a person was autistic, was diagnosed as autistic, and what they discovered is that she was hearing much too loud. You could drop a pin and she was scared to death. It was like an atomic bomb. Everything she heard much, much louder than what it really was, to the point where it was frightening, and she withdrew. She was actually diagnosed as autistic. So what they did, they changed her ears. They operated on her ears and made sure that she was not able to hear so loud. So they must have destroyed part of her hearing. When she was able to hear more normally and things were not excessively loud, then she was able to get over the autistic symptoms and grow up normally. So I want to focus here on the fact that autism is not just one cause. What I'm telling you is what I think is happening because some children develop the autistic symptoms at the same time they're getting their shots in toddlerhood, and the shots themselves do not affect the illness. If the child did not have the shots, then they would be autistic anyway because it's in their genetic structure to be that way. You know, I have a hard time with a lot of the medical reports that come out. You can prevent diabetes if you do this, or you can prevent heart disease if you do that. And I think that they should be more honest. From my perspective and from my research and from my counseling and all the things that I've done and the studying that I've done, if it's in your genes, you're going to get it. Now, maybe you can do things to stave it off a little or make it less intense, but if it's there in your genes, how can you not get it? It's there, you're pre-programmed for it. So to say that you can avoid illnesses if you do this or that, you may make it less probable that you'll have it, but the fact is, if it's in your genes, you're likely to get it. And so you just have to remember a lot of what goes on has to do with your body and has to do with your gene structure. It doesn't have to do with the fact that you ate an extra candy bar or whatever it was that you did. So you don't have to blame yourself if you're ill. You don't have to blame yourself. It's just the way it is. So let me go on with this. Autism, as I said before, is a spectrum disorder, and there are a lot of people who have autistic symptoms. They're not that badly autistic, but some of them are, and so we just have to realize that it's in the genetic structure. Now, I hope that answers some questions. If you have a child and you don't want to give them shots because they're going to get autism, there is no research evidence to show that a child will have autism as a result of the shots. If they're going to have autism, they're going to have it, whether you have the shots or not. So let me go on from here, and I want to go into children's nutrition, how important the nutrition is in the development of a child. I'm just, kind of cleaning up some things here before we go on into the preschool period. Now, the child's body is built and maintained by food and water that they take in. So that affects everything about them. The food and beverages have a direct effect on health of children, especially in young children that are just growing. Nuts, for example, will give a healthy brain. Protein from beans and eggs will give good muscles and the hormones needed for sleep. Nutrition is going to affect their behavior and their academic performance and their development. Young people tend to have a bad diet. Sugary foods, processed foods, all of that is bad for their development because as a young child is growing, they're adding cells to their brain, they're adding cells to their entire body. You have to have the nourishment that you need in order to be able to grow. And most young people, we're talking about preteens, they eat sugary foods, processed foods, low in fruits and vegetables and whole grains and lean protein. Some children's idea of a vegetable is a French fry. It's potato, isn't it? I did a sermon once about a man who only ate French fries. As he was growing up, he could not stand the texture or the taste of food. He just couldn't take it. So the only thing he wanted to eat was French fries. So his parents let him eat French fries. He grew up eating French fries. When he got married, he had her children. His children ate normally. His wife ate normally. All he wanted was French fries. They would go to a restaurant. All he ate was French fries. And it was odd, but that's what he wanted. And there are some people that are born with a psychological condition which they cannot stand the texture of food. They just can't take it psychologically. And he had that. Well, he continued in his life and ate French fries morning, noon, and night. So he got the nickname the Fry Guy. And he developed heart disease as a result of it, and he was having a lot of heart problems because the fat, the salt, all the things that you shouldn't have, he had them all the time. So then he now, as I understand it, he's in therapy, he's working on his texture issues so that he can increase fruits and vegetables and eat less fries so he'll be healthier. So he's being treated for it, but it is an actual condition. But nutrition is important. If you don't have the right nutrition, you can't grow. If you don't have the right nutrition, you can't develop. So let me go on with this. 80% of children 2 to 18 years don't eat fruits or vegetables on a daily basis. We need 2 or 3 cups of fruit and vegetables daily. I can't say I do it either, but I do like vegetables and I don't stay away from them. The number one vegetable is a potato, usually in the form of French fries. And by age 2, 11% of toddlers drink soda. There's nothing in soda that you want your child to have. They should be drinking water or fruit juice or milk or something, but soda, a lot of soda at age 2, there's no reason for it. The adolescents, their grain usually comes from processed food, not from really healthy grains. They have a low intake of iron and vitamin D and zinc and omega-3 fatty acids. So what happens if you have a low intake of all of those all of those items? Well, you will develop anemia, soft bones, weakness in your immunity system, and poor brain development. For iron, iron brings oxygen from the lungs to the blood. It's very important to the muscles and to the brain. If you have a deficiency of iron, you have extreme fatigue, low energy, paleness, muscle weakness, and you feel cold all the time. And the iron-rich foods that you can eat would be meat, poultry, nuts, and greens. For vitamin D, A deficiency of vitamin D is common in people that live in the more northern climates, say above Washington, D.C. If you are deficient in vitamin D, you can get rickets. Your bones are soft and weak and deformed. You can have a poor mood, and you can have digestive problems. Vitamin D is found in dairy foods, meat, and orange juice. People need to stay in the sun for 15 minutes a day in order to metabolize vitamin D. Now, zinc is a mineral that's needed for immunity. A deficiency in zinc will give you poor healing, colds, infections, skin problems, and will stunt growth. A lot of these cold remedies, they add zinc because it helps the healing process. And you can find it in tuna, meat, cooked beans, greens, and whole grains. And omega-3 fatty acids, you need these to grow and function, and your bodies do not create them, so you have to do it through diet. A deficiency of omega-3 fatty acids, and that'll give you slow growth, poor wound healing, and brain and vision problems. And you need to eat seafoods, and you can get supplements for that as well. So that's what I want to mention about nutrition. I'm going to close it here because I don't want to say too much about it. I'm not a nutritional expert. But if you have a young child, you want it to grow healthy, you've got to make sure that it gets the right kind of nutrition. That's going to affect its development, its mood, and how it turns out to be even as an adult. So it is critically important. So I'm going to close it here, and the next time we're going to go into childhood from toddler into the preschool period. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.